So at this point, my father was released and he came home. Now, I'm not going to give you a daily play-by-play. I don't have a daily play-by-play in my mind, but I'm going to tell you about some of the ways that he changed. I want to preface this by saying that my father was verbally abusive. Okay, so he was verbally abusive all of his life. That is important. He was verbally abusive to my mother and me, and I actually found out after he passed away, because I got in contact with his sister, who I haven't seen since I was like 6, and I found out that he was verbally abusive towards her and his mother as well, so I was not aware of that. So he was not the nicest person. He was still my dad, and I still loved him. He was a decent father. I mean, he was always there. You know, I played sports when I was a kid and all. He was there for everything. When I had father-daughter dances, he was there for it and all. But he was extremely verbally abusive to both me and my mom. Okay? Now, the reason I tell you this is because of the fact that what happened to my father was an extreme exaggeration of who he already was. So if you're watching this and you have someone in your family who's suffering from glioblastoma, or if you didn't heed my warning and you yourself have glioblastoma, please don't take it to mean that you're going to turn into this, because my father already was this. Just, this was like a exaggerated cartoon version of what he already was. And I mean, there were some things in there that were added in that were not like him at all and never would have been. But this isn't, I don't know if this is typical or not. Okay, unfortunately, I don't personally know anybody else who had glioblastoma or anybody else who dealt with it. But over the course of time, my father began to get much more demanding. And it was, I don't know, it was kind of weird. Okay, for instance, there was one particular night, he had this thing for calling the police at 3 o'clock in the morning. It happened on a regular basis, and it got more and more frequent. And we were at a point where we were really afraid that we were going to start getting fines from the police because he was becoming a nuisance. But it was almost like clockwork. At 3 o'clock every morning, he would call the police. And his main problem with it was that he thought me and my mother should be awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, taking care of him. And he was angry because we had gone to bed. So he would call the cops and he would say he was being neglected. So he was constantly trying to report elder abuse, is pretty much what it was. And unfortunately he almost succeeded. But there was one particular night where he had actually gotten up from bed to go into the kitchen to get the telephone, which is, you know, the other side of the house from his bedroom. And in the process, he fell. It wasn't a quiet sound. You know, the walker went flying and hit the hardwood floor, and he hit the floor and rolled around and smacked the walls a couple of times. And I ran downstairs, and my mom came out of her room, and, you know, we asked him if he was okay. You know, made sure he, hadn't knocked himself silly, and he fell down, like, back here, which is where the surgery had been. Now, the wound was healed and everything, but still, you know, you kind of, you know, so I did the whole, you know, how many fingers am I holding up, you know, kind of thing. And he, you know, he knew how many fingers I was holding up. He knew who the president was. He knew what year it was. And he said to my mother, because I was trying to pick him up, okay, and my father was not a small man. He was a big man. And since he was on steroids, he was getting a lot bigger. His face, he had what they call moon face, where his face got perfectly round, and he was eating nonstop. So, I mean, he was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was all, you know, the medication. And I was trying to pick him up, and he was not helping me. He was just going, you know, dead weight. He wasn't trying to assist at all. And he told my mother, he said, press the red button. And we're both looking at him like, what red button? And he goes, press the red button and the first lady will send men to pick me up. And we were like, what are you talking about? The first lady is going to... And I was like, do you think is there some red buttons? Do you think there's some red button somewhere that's going to contact Michelle Obama and she's going to send... Yes. Okay. My father was also obsessive. Okay, which again, it became greatly exaggerated. He was now obsessing over an old television show, not that old, I guess it was 90s. And some of you may have remembered the show. It was called The West Wing, which was about the president and, you know, life in the White House and things like that. And it went on for several seasons. My father, I went into his Netflix account a couple months ago and realized that he actually, because Netflix keeps a record of everything you've watched and, you know, what times and stuff like that. He was literally spending 12 hours a day watching The West Wing. Just nonstop, one show after the other, just all day long for 12 hours a day. So we think that what happened was when he fell, he had a delusion that he was actually in the White House. So we don't know if when he said First Lady, if he meant Michelle Obama or if he meant the woman in the show. We really never did figure that out. I did end up, unfortunately, I ended up deadlifting him up off the floor. I hurt my shoulder and my back pretty good, but I did get him up off the floor and I got him on his feet. That was just one of many incidences. Unfortunately, it got worse over time, and if I can find some of the pictures, I'll put the pictures in here. He continued to call the police. He started to systematically destroy the house. He was taking all of his belongings and putting them in whatever bags he could find. And he was stuffing them in the back of his car, and he was throwing them out into the garage. He had them tucked under the bed. He had them in his closet. He had them stuffed behind the chair in the front, like, office area, the office room that we have. And, you know, all of his belongings, he was just stuffing them in places, or he was just plain throwing them out. Like, he just threw out all of his underwear and socks. Just, it didn't matter. They could have still been in the packages, and he was just taking them and throwing them away, because he decided he was never going to wear underwear again. Probably TMI, but, you know, he just was, he would throw things all over the floor, clothes, garbage, wrappers, food, you know, whatever the case may be. And if my mother or I tried to clean up a little bit, he'd just start throwing things at us, screaming and hollering and throwing things at us. Now, my father was also the kind of person, he never left the house if he didn't look really good. You know what I'm saying? He would never leave the house in his pajamas. He was the type of guy, when he was younger, it was always, you know, he went to work in suits, you know, with the shirt and tie and everything, and he had the coat and the vests, and, you know, I think he carried pocket watches and everything at some point. And when he got older, he moved to a new company, and he was wearing, you know, dress shirts, maybe without the tie, and dress pants. And when he went out when he was home and not at work, he would wear polos or mock turtlenecks and, you know, his khakis or you know, like the khaki shorts or something like that if it was summertime. He always made a concerted effort to look good when he went out. I mean, it was, you know, he had some class, so he was, you know, he was trying to dress like he had some class. With the illness came this wonderfully weird clothing combinations. He started going out in his pajamas. For, I can't remember if it was my birthday or if it was their anniversary. But one of the two, it was either their anniversary or my birthday. I think it might have been their anniversary. We went to the Angus Barn, which is a restaurant that's, you know, a little ways away from here, but it's a higher dollar restaurant. You know, like a meal for 3 people is going to cost close to $200. And it was one of these things where we, you know, maybe once or twice a year for really special occasions, we go to this place. So we took him there, and me and my mother dressed. My father wore his pajamas. We did manage to get him to wear the black pajama pants instead of, he had a pair of navy blue pajama pants that had little bears on them, and he had a pair of orange pajama pants with big black mooses all over them. So we managed to get him to not wear those. We did get him to put the black ones on, but he also had these bedroom slippers that were, they look like Uggs. They're not Uggs, but they look like them. And he wore them, and one pant leg was tucked in and the other one wasn't. And then he had this shirt on that was like 4 sizes too small, so it was like skin tight on him. It was terrible. That unfortunately escalated as well. It just got more and more interesting. But it was things of that nature that happened. We had one day, this was a little further in, this was, you know, towards the end of the time that we were able to keep him at home. He wanted to go out to lunch. Now, at this point, he hadn't spoken to me in 2 weeks. I don't know why he was mad at me, but he was mad at me for something. And he decided he was going to talk to me because he wanted to go to lunch. And the place that he wanted to go to lunch to was a place my mom didn't particularly like, but I loved. It's still one of my favorite restaurants. And I said, okay. I said, let's go. I'll take you. You know, get your things together and we'll go. Great. That was fascinating. To give you an idea, his outfit, he was wearing 2 different shoes. 2 very different shoes. He had one of those Ugg slippers on, and then he had a black, like fur-lined Croc on the other foot. He was wearing his navy blue pajama pants with the bears. I think the navy blue ones were the ones with the moose. The orange ones were the ones with the bears. So he was wearing the navy blue pants with the little mooses all over them. And he was wearing this red shirt. It was one of these ones that he used to wear to the gym. My father went to the gym like pretty much, I think, like 6 days a week, until he got sick. But he had one of those sweat wicking shirts, and it was bright red, but it was like 5 or 6 sizes too small. So I mean, it was plastered onto his body, and he had some kind of stain, like down the front of it. It was this like humongous stain, but because of the way it was, it looked like he had bit the head off a squirrel. That's the only way I can describe that. And his hair's all tousled all over the place, and he has his walker, and he shuffles into the place. And he was mean as all get out to these people in this restaurant. I mean, he was like a raging lion in this place. He monopolized the whole restaurant. It's one of those places where you go up to the front, you order your meal, and you go down and you pick things. It's a Mediterranean restaurant, so you go up and you order, and then you can pick, you know, entrees or desserts or pieces of bread or something like that. He monopolized the whole place. He had all 5 employees back there waiting on him. He's, get this for me, and then he'd go to somebody else, now you get this for me. Well, by the time he was done, he had I think he had like 8 different desserts, 4 different entrees, and 3 salads, and several pieces of bread. And he's still running up and down, and he's barking orders, and I managed to get my hands on the guy running the cash register. And I told him the situation, and I said, look, I said, I am really sorry, and I said, please apologize to the staff for me. I said, he's got brain cancer, he doesn't know what he's doing. So, thank God they were so good about it. That place, they were so nice about it, and I let them know. I wrote their manager and let them know, because it was above and beyond. But that was the kind of thing we were dealing with on a regular basis. And again, it continued to escalate. So, over a period of time, we had a visiting nurse that was coming in. He had to go to physical therapy and things like that, and it was they wanted him to stay at this physical therapy place. And he stayed there, but somehow figured out that if he refused service for 3 days in a row, the insurance would stop paying, and they sent him home prematurely. So he wasn't done with his physical therapy, but he somehow managed to trick them into letting him come home before he was ready. So he came home, and we had a visiting nurse that came in, I think 3 or 4 times a week, and 2 or 3 of those times she would take blood, and they had to run tests and everything, because he had a double bypass and valve replacement, so he was on warfarin, and they have to do blood work and all this other stuff with warfarin. So she was doing a lot of that for him, but she also had to test his blood because of all the medications, the chemo, the radiation, all of that. They had to do all these blood tests, so they were constantly pricking him and taking blood. So he had like in the inside of his elbow and around his wrists area, especially in here. He had these hideous bruises, like these dark purple, almost black bruises. So this is one of those bizarre stories that people are going to think is fake. My mother and I had gone to bed that night, this one particular night, and we had put my father to sleep on the couch because for some reason he decided he wanted to sleep on the couch instead. This had been a trend for a couple of weeks. He was more comfortable on the couch. So we had our neighbor was over, and she helped me get him onto the couch because he couldn't walk himself from his chair to his couch, and he was, all this other stuff. So 3 o'clock in the morning came along, and he decided he was going to call the police. So he gets himself up. Somehow, this man who couldn't walk himself from his chair to the couch gets himself up. He goes into the kitchen, gets the phone, calls 911. He tells them that he's being abused, and he needs help. So the cops show up. This is about where we realize that something really horrible had happened. While he was in the living room, I'm tentative about putting this story on the internet just because of the way my father was before he got sick, but I'm going to do it anyway because you guys need to know the story, I guess. When he originally got up off the sofa, he decided to take off his pants. And he doesn't wear underwear at this point. He had thrown out all of his underwear. So he removed his pants, made his way into the kitchen. There's a little desk thing over in the kitchen. And at that time, he had his own computer, and the computer was on that desk. So he had a big leather chair by the computer. So he sat down on that chair, and he called 911, tells them, I'm being abused, I'm being held against my will, and I need help. And we hear sirens. That's what wakes me and my mother up. We hear the sirens. They come in, and all the lights in the house go on immediately. And we realize that he has urinated all over the living room. I mean, literally, he removed his pants, stood in the middle of the living room, and turned in a circle. There was urine everywhere. And he's sitting in the chair in the living room in the kitchen with no pants on, and the cops come in. So we got these 2 cops that come in, and they go over and they talk to him. And he tells them, oh, she won't let me have any pants, and, she makes me stay in this chair all the time, I'm not allowed to move. And then he shows them his black bruised arms, and he says, look what she did to me. Talking about my mother. Me and my mom are standing there with our mouths just... And one of the cops turns around, and he puts his hand on my mom, right here, and he pushes her into the living room with his hand on his gun. He didn't draw it. He did not draw the gun. But he had his hand on it, ready to go. And he pushes my mom in the living room, and he says, ma'am, I need you to come in here. My mom goes, okay. She says, I need to call the nurse's emergency line. I need you to let me do that. And the cop says, okay, no problem. So she quick calls. Thank God they had a 24-hour line. So she calls, and she tells them what's happening. And she puts the cop on the phone. And the nurse says, yeah, you know, we're taking blood from him several times a week. And that's what all that's from. So they go in with their flashlights and they look and they see, you know, the holes from the needles and everything. So they take my father in to the hospital. And this was, I mean, he was constantly in and out of the hospital at this point. He would call and they have to do something. So they take him to the hospital. So this was, again, he went to the hospital again. And I guess he was there maybe for the day. I mean, he stayed, obviously, the rest of the night. He was there for the day. And then he came home again, and we started all this again. So at this point, he's got all of his clothing is either bagged up and in the trunk of his car or stuffed in places around the house, or it's just all over the floor so that we have to walk on it. I mean, literally all over the floor. He was also using a urinal. And it's one of those little handheld like jugs that's designed for peeing in, and he would just kind of leave it out. And our favorite was when he left it on the kitchen counter, but he, you know, but you know, that was a thing that we had to deal with. It started to escalate a lot worse. So I guess the last story about this part of it that I can tell would be the last night that he was home. I can't remember where I was at. I can remember this day vividly as if it happened yesterday, but I can't remember what I was doing before I came in. But I came in and I had parked my car in the driveway. And I was getting ready to come in the house, and my next door neighbor came over and, oh, hi, you know, and we're doing our chatty thing and everything. And she says, I want to come in and see your mom. And I said, okay, yeah, not a problem. And her oldest boy came over. And he's, I think at the time he was like 9. And he came over, he says, oh, I want to go in and see Judy and Bill. And, you know, usually she lets him. But for whatever reason, that day, she says, no, you know, I think you should just go home. You know, you can go in and see them another day. And he was really upset, but, you know, he went home, and it turned out to be a good thing. We go back into the house, I bring her in, and my mom's sitting in the living room reading the paper, and we sit down and we talk and everything, and my father was in the bedroom. And I guess my neighbor was there about maybe 10 minutes, and my father comes shuffling out with his walker, and he's, oh, hi, how are you? And, you know, real friendly like and everything, and he's, whatever it was, and he sat down in his chair, and at this point, again, he was not speaking to me at this point, so he ignored the fact that I was there. So my mother said, you know, excuse me a moment, I have to use the restroom. So she got up, and she uses the master restroom, so she had to go into the bedroom that he just came out of. So my mother goes into the room, and 30 seconds I hear her call for me to come in. And I said, okay, no problem. I came in, and she's over by the bed, and she's sobbing into her arms, and I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? And her little dog, now my mom has a Bichon Frise, and there's video clips of her around. We have a very small Bichon Frise. She's only about 14 pounds. So she's a little baby. And she's sitting on the bed, and she's looking at my mother, and my mom is just absolutely sobbing. And my mom says, my mom looked up to me, and she says, I need a trash bag. And I said, okay. So I went in and I got a trash bag, and I came back in and I said, Mom, what's the problem? What's going on? And she says, your father force-fed the dog dark chocolate. For people who don't know, dark chocolate, especially the kind that my father ate, which was high concentrations of the cocoa, it's extremely toxic to dogs, especially little ones. It can kill them pretty damn quick. So she said that to me, and she's like trying to clean up, because my mom at this point, I mean, she just didn't know what to do at this point in time. So I grabbed the dog, and I picked up the dog, and I left the room, and my neighbor is saying to me, well, what's going on? What happened? And I turned around and I said, in front of my father, I said, my father force-fed the dog dark chocolate. And I said, anywhere between a little tiny piece to almost a full pound. and my neighbor jumped up with me, and we got in, and my father at this point is hollering and screaming, and I can't even begin to tell you what it was that he was saying. The only part of it that I heard that I still can remember is that he told me to get out and not come back. So I wasn't paying much attention. My neighbor was trying to get me out, and I got the dog, I got her leash on and everything, and I jumped into my mother's car for whatever god-awful reason. I jumped into my mother's little Miata, and I got the dog to the emergency vet in time. The dog is okay. She did have some repercussions. She's got a heart murmur, and she was having seizures for a while after that. Not many seizures, but she had a couple. But overall, she made it. They induced vomiting, and they were able to get the chocolate out. But go back to the house. I got into the car and I drove off without my neighbor. My neighbor stayed there to get my mother. And my mother's making her way across the house because it finally clicked that my mother figured out that I was rushing the dog to the emergency vet. So she's making her way across the house, and my father is still hollering and screaming and stomping, and he can't get out of his chair, thank God. So, he's just yelling and screaming and threatening. And he turns around to my mother and tells my mother that if she follows me, and this is where it gets scary, he tells my mother that if she follows me, he is going to stab her in the throat and then go out into a field somewhere and kill himself. My neighbor grabbed my mother, took her out of the house, and she took my mom to the emergency vet in her van, and they met me there. We call the cops from the vet. We're sitting at the vet's office, and we call the police. And at this point, my mom is terrified because he had actually laid out, this is how I'm going to kill you. This is what I'm going to do. Da 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 da. It wasn't just, I'm going to kill you. No. He actually told her how he was going to do it. So she calls the police. The police come out. They show up. They don't do anything about it. Apparently, when they showed up, because I actually stopped at the police department to find out why the heck they didn't take him out of there at that point. What they told me was that he was sitting out on the front porch and told them that he was locked out and he was waiting for us to come home. We don't know what happened there because when we came home, the doors were all unlocked. So he wasn't locked out. I don't know what the story was there, but it's hearsay. I didn't hear it from my father. It's hearsay. We end up back at home, and he's sitting at home on his computer. And my mother drops the dog off with the neighbor because she decided she wasn't going to bring the dog in the house. My mother tells my father, she says, I think we need a break, and she says, I'm going to pay for you to stay in a hotel for a couple of nights. She said, because this is getting out of hand. At this point, it was all, we had crossed into a point of time where he was literally throwing dishes, throwing glasses. He kicked his computer across the house. He was breaking everything. He was peeing on everything. He was pooping on the furniture. He had completely destroyed the house. I mean, it was unbelievable what he did to the house. And he was getting increasingly violent, grabbing at us, throwing things at us, attempting to hit us. He was telling me he was, what he was going to do to me, and it didn't include killing me, but it did include, beating me up. So, it was this whole, he was really, really bad at this point. And my mom figured for our safety, he needed to go. And he agreed. He said, okay, no problem. I'm going to go to, such and such hotel. And my mom said, okay. He left, but he was out in the, we don't know where his car was at this point. Okay, just so you know, his car was gone. It wasn't in the garage. It was when I left with the dog. It wasn't when we came back. So we call him a cab. He's out front. Now, mind you, he had no ID with him. He was wearing an outfit similar to the Mediterranean restaurant where it looked like he bit the head off a squirrel. And he had a bottle of wine in his pocket, and that was all he had. He was probably already drunk at this point. My father, mind you, was not a drinker. He had a glass of wine every night because of his heart. But once this started to happen, for whatever reason, he started drinking a lot. And we found out much later on when my mom started getting bills in that he was actually like racking up tabs at bars and stuff. It was bizarre. He had taken up cigar smoking. You know, so he was drinking a lot and he was smoking cigars. We don't understand what was happening there. So he was probably already drunk at this point. He goes to the, you know, he says he's going to go, but he wants to see his dog first. That's the part I missed. He says he wants to see his dog first. So my mom, you know, argues with him about it a little bit. He says, I'm not going to leave until I get to see the dog. And he's getting angrier. This is where he started to get a little angrier. So my mom went next door. She got the dog. And she brought the dog in. And he was petting her and he was talking all nice to her. And he was holding her. And he's petting her and he was talking all nice to her. And then all of a sudden he just took the dog and just threw her at the floor. Okay, remember 14-pound Bichon. Throws her on the floor. And he's hollering and screaming and everything. And my mom gets him out the door. And now he's outside. And he is walking up and down the driveway cursing and screaming and hollering. The neighbors are coming outside and pulling their kids that are playing outside. They're pulling them into the houses and all. It was ugly. It was bad. Finally, the cab comes, picks him up, takes him to the hotel. Now, this was probably about 7 o'clock at night that this happened. And me and my mom are sitting there and we decide, we're talking and all. And I said to my mom, I said, you know he's coming back, right? And she says, you think he's going to? I said, yeah. I said, I think he's going to come back. I said he was getting systematically angrier. I said, now he's sitting in a hotel room with a bottle of wine. And I said, he's going to get extremely furious. And I said, he's coming back. And she said, okay, we'll wait. So we barricaded the doors, just, you know, chairs. We put chairs on the doorknobs and all, and we waited. And about 11 o'clock that night, sure enough, we hear the garage door go up. The car's back. He pulled in his car. Now, remember, he left in a cab. He came back in his car. We actually found out that he tried to follow us, and he thought that we took the dog to her regular vet. We didn't. We took her to the emergency vet, but he didn't know that. So he had pulled his car in, and we found out he pulled his car in, parked it there, went to a bar that was next door to the vet's office, drank himself stupid, and then took a cab home and left the car there. So while he was at the hotel, he drank himself even more stupid. He drank an entire bottle of wine, all by his little self, jumped in his car, and he drove home. Now, we had the doors barricaded at this point, and he started trying to get into the garage door, and he couldn't get in there. It's a metal door. He couldn't get in. The barricade was good there, so he couldn't maneuver the door. He makes his way to the front door, and very quickly, mind you, for a man on a walker, he made his way very quickly to the front door that he then proceeded to kick in. He did kick the front door in. He didn't break it. He got it open, got the chair out of the way, and by the grace of God, he fell. That sounds pretty cruel, but in all honesty, it's not. So he gets the door open, and he's screaming and hollering, and he's saying all this just verbally abusive stuff. Stuff that I don't need to put out in the public. I was pretty much yelling at him to leave my mother alone. Because, in all honesty, that's who he was coming after, was my mother. My mother's on the phone with 911. She's begging them to send somebody there immediately. You know, he kicked the door in, this, that, and the next thing. So, the cops get there a couple minutes later, and I think there were like 3 or 4 cruisers out in the front of the house, which is, you know, that's lovely in a neighborhood. We live in a cul-de-sac. It's like, so we had 3 or 4 cruisers there at 11 o'clock at night. Actually, it was later than that. It was like probably around midnight. I don't even remember the times at this point. It's a blur. He's sitting there and he's, you know, telling the cops that my mom was threatening to shoot him, and, you know, oh, she's, you know, waving this and waving that, and it was great. None of it was true. I mean, she wasn't threatening him. She wasn't even talking to him. She was on the phone with 911, you know, so she wasn't, you know, trying to shoot him or anything like that. And, you know, we talked to the cops and everything, and long story short, they told us that me, my mom, and the dog had to go to a hotel. Yeah, we got kicked out of the house. And their reasoning was that he was the owner of the home and he had a right to stay there. My argument was my mother's name was on the house as well. she's got a right to stay there, and she's the one that asked him to leave, and he agreed to go. Then came back and kicked the door in. But that's, that's neither here nor there. It really doesn't matter anymore. He's gone. So the cops are in the house, and the cops were there for a while. I mean, this was going on for quite a while. They took all the kitchen knives and stuff like that away, so and I had to take them up and put them upstairs and lock them away in my room and everything, because he couldn't get up the stairs. It's just too many stairs. Plus I can lock the door. So I locked the door, and all the, like, every knife in the house, every pair of scissors that we had in the house, like anything sharp, everything was it was locked away in the room. He had a penchant for knives. We later figured out. So we did that. The cop told my mother that the next morning, which I believe was it a Saturday? It was either a Saturday or a Sunday, because it was an awkward day. So it was either Saturday or Sunday. They told my mom to go into the courthouse and to talk to a magistrate. Once we got the order from the magistrate, they would come back and they would take him out and take him to the hospital, because at that point it would be an involuntary committal. Wonderful. So we go upstairs. Well, my mom went to her room. I went upstairs to my room, and I gathered up enough clothes for the week, because I needed, pajamas. I needed my work clothes for the week. I had to pack a whole bunch of clothing, and we weren't sure when we were coming back. So we, packed everything up. My mom packed a bunch of stuff for the dog, and we ended up at some hotel, like 2 towns over, and he's calling all the neighbors trying to find out where we are. He called my next door neighbor to come over and, change bandages on his feet, because his feet had gotten really bad. Like they had swollen to the point where they were weeping. Ugh. But, they were bandaging him, and my neighbor would come over and clean them and bandage them and stuff like that. Well, he's got her coming over at 1 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 in the morning. She's got 4 kids that, are all under the age of 11 at this point. And she's over here at 1:30 in the morning, her and her husband, because her husband wasn't letting her come over here alone, and, she's, cleaning up his wounds and everything. So me and my mom end up at the hotel. I threw up in the parking lot of the hotel, because at this point, anxiety struck, because we don't know what's happening. We don't know what he's going to do to us. We don't know what the law is going to do to us. We don't know what's happening. And this started like a good long time, about a year of just unending anxiety. And it was temporary anxiety, just a lot of stress and a lot of nerves, but we ended up in this hotel, and we ended up staying there about a week. We did come back to the house at one point to pack up, but I needed the time in the hotel, because I was having trouble coming into the house. And now we were at this point where we were constantly looking, and we were looking everywhere. And the first 3 days we were at the hotel, I wouldn't even leave the room. We had food delivered, things like that. And the people at this hotel that we stayed at, they were marvelous. They understood what was happening, and they went above and beyond with us. And that was a Holiday Inn. And they just went above and beyond. They were absolutely wonderful. I will never say a bad thing about that particular hotel, forever. But we ended up coming back and getting more clothes, things like that. And my mom started going through things. And that's when we realized the severity of the problem. My mom started finding knives all over the house that he had hidden. Knives that were unaccounted for. They weren't part of the pile that we had taken up into my room. One of them was like this gigantic round-ended knife that my mom had for like cutting meat and watermelon and all. I mean, the blade on it was like a foot long. And she found that someplace in the house. She found a knife tucked underneath his computer keyboard. She found one in a book in the office. In the dining room, she found another one hidden in like underneath some stuff. She found 3 of them tucked away in the bedroom. She found one in the bathroom. She found one in the living room, like tucked underneath the sofa cushion on the sofa that he was sleeping on. We just were finding knives everywhere. And to give you an idea about this, I actually found 2 more knives in the garage about a month ago. So we're still finding knives. I mean, he had knives everywhere. And he just had this horrible penchant for knives, which of course scared the hell out of my mom, because if you remember, he told her exactly how he was going to kill her, and it revolved around stabbing her in the throat. We later came to find out, after we came back to the house, we started cleaning everything out because we needed a new carpet. We needed a new kitchen floor because of the amount of destruction that he had caused in the house. We had to tear up the entire carpet. The kitchen floor had to come up. They had to put a whole new kitchen floor down. It was a mess. So we were cleaning everything up. And I went out to the car, and this was the first time we had really looked at the car since all this happened. The car was still in reverse. We don't know how he got the key out of the ignition. He did. He got the key out of the ignition because he had to open the front door, and the keys were on the same ring. But he ripped the key out of the ignition at some point in time while the car was still in reverse, because it was still the emergency, the parking brake was on, but the car was still in reverse. So I got in and I turned the car, I turned the car on and put it in park. And I was going through trying to find paperwork, because remember also my father was hiding everything in his car. So there was like paperwork and manuals and bills and all kinds of stuff stuffed away in his car. And I opened the passenger side door to go into the glove box. And my father's got a Toyota Avalon. And on the doors, it's a 2003 Toyota Avalon. On the doors there are these little compartments that you can pull open. It's like a little shelf. And inside of it with the handle sticking out was this little folding pocket knife that I had given him like years ago. And it was branded with the logo of the place that I used to work. They were like really cheap little knives, and they're really hard to open. I have a tough time opening them. My father had about maybe 30% usage of his hands. He actually had to use, and we found the pliers that he used as well, he had to use pliers to open the knife. So this was a planned thing, and he had it stuffed into this little drawer. And if you were driving the car or anywhere in the car, you wouldn't have seen that knife because it would have been hidden by his thigh. So we come to find out that he actually had a plan to take my mother out. They would drive over for his radiation treatments at the hospital, and the radiation treatments were like 40 minutes away. And his plan was to wait until they got onto this one major highway. He was going to stab her on this highway while she was driving at 60 miles an hour, and the plan was to kill her and have her drive off the road and take him out as well, so that they would both be killed. Isn't that lovely? But that's what we ended up finding out. I'm going to go ahead and stop this and go into part 3 so I can start telling you guys about all the legal processes. Oh, fun. Actually, what I may do is I'm probably going to stop for the night because this is a tough story to tell, and I've already been telling it for about 2 hours. So I'm going to do these. I'm going to upload them. You guys hang in there, and I will have the rest of the story for you shortly. Thanks for hanging in there, guys.